Good evening, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. Very happy to be back again for another session of the Science of Dhamma Forum, where we will be covering interpretations and translations of Bhante Punnaji, and also bringing in elements of psychology, medicine, science, neuroscience to explain some of the teachings of the Buddha. And we know that from what Bhante has taught us, the Buddha's teaching is very scientific, and I hope to be able to bring in scientific findings to connect. In fact, I'm very excited, not so much only for tonight, but also for the next session, because I came across some very invaluable material, brand new material to be put in for the next sharing. But for tonight, we're going to concentrate on from perception to concept. Last week, we covered sensation and feeling. And this week, we take it one step further, that from sensation and feeling, it produces perception. And then from perception, the mind begins to interpret what has been perceived and produce concepts or stories. Our mind likes to make up stories. So that's what we're going to cover today. For those of you who have brought your book, the Arya Magga Level 3 book, both the Mahindarama edition and the Buddhist Maha Vihara edition, I have put the page number at the top. The black number is the Buddhist Maha Vihara edition, and the purple number is the Mahindarama edition. However, for this particular diagram that came from page 107 of this Buddhist Maha Vihara edition, the diagram in this book was faithfully reproduced. Unfortunately, when we sent it to Penang to have it published by Mahindarama, some people up there, out of their own wisdom, without consulting me or Bhante, redrew some of my diagrams. And unfortunately, that particular diagram on page 112 was very badly done. It kind of isn't quite the way I was trying to represent here, for those of you who have this copy. For tonight, we will cover conception, how the mind creates concepts. But the mind actually does two things. First, it creates concepts, and that is produced by the cognitive process, mano. Next, it actually reacts emotionally. So there is an emotion component to the way the mind works, and that is the work of the citta, which we will cover next session. So today we will focus on this conception. Now, I want to point out one important thing for those of you who have this edition, that on page 27 of this edition, there is a diagram that was added, and we never had that diagram in here. This is the work of whoever was doing it in Penang. Out of his own wisdom, he decided to make this diagram, which doesn't quite make sense. And in fact, there is a major flaw in the diagram. If you take a look at it, the top line is supposed to talk about popular translations, and the bottom line is supposed to talk about Bhante's explanation. And it says Bhante is teaching existential thinking. We know that Bhante doesn't do that. So it's kind of very disappointing. But of course, we can correct it. I could say maybe it's a typo mistake, or maybe it's something else. So that is where the mistake is. Bhante never teaches existential thinking. On the contrary, Bhante teaches experiential thinking. And that's actually what we're going to talk about today. Experiential thinking. Right? So, what is experiential thinking then? Now, commonly, some people think that to uncover reality, or they even take one step further, to see the ultimate truth, you have to see things as they are. There's something incorrect, improper about this statement. To see things as they are, what does it mean? It means things exist To see things as they are is an existential thinking philosophy. So if you go to page 31 of the Buddhist Maha Vihara edition, Bhante pointed it out. This came from that Pali phrase. And the common translation is seeing things as they are. And Bhante pointed out that this is existential thinking. And Bhante corrected it and to say, what we are really trying to understand is understanding of how things come to be. That means how things arise. Because things arise and fade away, arise and fade away. So we are trying to understand how they arise. Because as soon as they arise, they will fade away. So this is experiential thinking, to see how things arise, how things come to be. And following on the next page, on page 32, one very important section there is Bhante's interpretation. It says, focusing the attention on the process of seeing or the process of perception instead of looking at the object. So if you really want to understand how things come to be, then you have to look at the process, how the process takes place, not to look at the object. Simple example is when people meditate, they say, observe the abdomen. So they are observing the abdomen rising, falling, rising, falling. But that is still observing an object. What you should be observing is an introspective attention. How the abdomen rises. What is the process that led to the rising of the abdomen? That is to be investigated. And that investigation, Bhante has clarified further on, is Dhamma Vichaya, the investigation of the Dhamma. And in fact, that takes us to the point, the word Dhamma. Dhamma is often translated as truth. But actually, Bhante explained further on, I will come to it later on, that Dhamma actually does not really mean truth, although it is used in that manner. We'll come to that in a moment. Now, these pages that I highlight would be useful for those of you who are studying this book to go back and refresh yourself. If you didn't bring your book or if you don't want to read it, it doesn't matter. We're not going to read it today. When you go home, take note of the pages and refresh yourself in those pages, because these are the concepts very important to Bhante's teaching. And we're going to cover conception today. So I'm going to give you references to pages that explain that. Now let's take a look at the process of experience from a graphical point of view. That experience is a chain reaction, that we are continuously experiencing it, because experience is not a one-time process. It's a continuous thing, ongoing, rising, falling. So it's a chain reaction. With every rise, there is a series of reactions. With every fall, there is a series of reactions. So the process of experience is a chain reaction. So if we look at the process of experience, then of course we all know environmental activities stimulate our sense organs and they produce the perception, vijnana, which I already explained in the last time, that vijnana is perception, not consciousness. A more precise scientific explanation would be perception. And this arises because of the Panchakanda. So if we look at the Panchakanda, it produces vijnana and then followed by the cognitive process trying to interpret it. So cognitive process is the mano part of the mind, and that creates concepts. So here I'm giving you the big picture. We'll go to the details in a moment. So mano is responsible for producing concepts. And with this concept, it leads to recognition. Recognition means you recognize a particular experience or a particular reality, right? And this recognition is really Dhamma. It's called Dhamma. So Dhamma has many meanings, and it is commonly used to mean truth, but actually here Bhante pointed out that Dhamma can also mean recognition, the realization of a specific reality that arises. So that is recognition, or simply put, recognition. You recognize something. At the same time, whatever sensations that are being experienced in the process of the Panchakanda, there is a feeling that goes with it, Vedana. And that feeling is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And it is Chitta that reacts to that feeling, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, and that leads to emotions. So basically, emotion arises from the Chitta's reaction of bodily or reaction of these environmental sensations, whether they are pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And it leads to the mind producing affection, whether you like something or you don't like something. And it leads to your mood and your temperament, whether you're feeling good about it or you're feeling unhappy about it. And this is what leads to suffering. This reaction is commonly, in the Pali word for this reaction is tanha, commonly translated as craving. And Bhante has pointed out it is an emotional reaction. But we're not going to deal with that in this evening session. We'll talk about that in the next session. We're going to focus on conception for this evening. So we did perception in the last session. Now we're doing conception. And next session we will do emotion and move on from there. And then next comes wanting to do something, an intention, and commonly called volition. The Pali term for that is cetana. And these three things go together. When you have a volition, whether you act upon it or you do not act upon it, that mere fact that you already have that volition, it leads you to karma, action. Not doing something is also a kind of action. Inaction is an action. So whatever you do or do not do, right, that is action. And that is karma itself. And when you have karma, it produces vipaka, which is basically the consequence of your action. These three things go together, cetana, karma, vipaka, and it will come and affect you. It will influence you, it will have some effect on you, some consequences on your life, your present life or a future life. So this is really, in a nutshell, at a top level, a brief explanation of the process of experience. From environmental stimulations, we have perception, and then we begin to interpret it with our cognitive process, and then we begin to react with our emotional process or affective process, and then we make decisions what to do, and we take action, and we produce consequences, and it comes back to affect our lives. So this is the top level broad explanation of the process of experience. We'll go more specifically into the cognitive process where conception takes place. So let's take a look at this page 108 on the Buddhist Maha Vihara edition. What is experience? And Bhante pointed out that we are organisms in an environment, and we experience the environment through our perception. From perception, which is the result of stimulation of the environment, we have an experience, and then from that experience we react. So when Bhante said that organisms in an environment, what did he mean? What he really meant is that environmental activities continuously affect us. So two things is happening in the body. The first thing that is happening in the body is a process of metabolism that keeps the body alive. And the second thing is that the body is an agent for all these activities. It actually has all kinds of receptors. We call them sense organs. They are really receptors of stimulations from the environment. The eye is a receptor for light. The ear is a receptor for sound. The hand is a receptor, or the body is a receptor for tangible objects. And the the tongue is a receptor for taste. And the nose is a receptor for smell or fragrance. So it is through these 5 physical senses that we are able to experience the environment. And this is what Bhante meant when he said we are organisms in an environment. And this is the way This is the Buddhist way of thinking. We cannot think of this body as the self, In one of the later sessions, maybe not the next one, but the one after that, we're going to go quite deep into the self. We're going to talk a little bit about how we create this idea that there is a self, but not in the next session. Next session, we will deal with emotions first. So with all this going on, then we react. And basically, the reaction of the organism is a chain reaction to form a series of reaction. And the first reaction is, of course, perception that I pointed out. So now let's take a look at perception more specifically. Environmental activities stimulate the sense organ, and this gives rise to the process of perception, or some call this the Panchakanda, the 5 aggregates. Panchakanda commonly translated as the 5 aggregate. And Bhante calls this the 5 constituents of the process of perception. It produces the perception, right? And vijnana is the perception that is being produced. And what is perception? Perception is the awareness that I have seen something, I have heard something, I have smelled something, I have touched something, and I have tasted something. So that is a perception, and it produces a mental image in the mind. You become aware of something that you have touched, smelled, tasted, or heard, or seen with your eyes. So that is the perception. Each of these Panchakanda elements, they actually stimulate a different part of the mind. Sanya, for instance, is that part of the Panchakanda that stimulates the cognitive process. Right? And this is, of course, explained in Bhante's book. So if you want further details, it is found in the book. And in fact, Bhante explained this very thoroughly in the Paticca Samuppada. So Sanya leads to cognitive process, right? The cognition. And this is Mano. And Vedana leads to the affective process, Chitta, which is commonly called emotions, the beginning of emotion. So with this cognitive process and the perception, there is a mental image that arises, Rupa. Again, I'd like to point out, Bhante has made it very clear that Rupa is not materiality or matter. It is really a mental image of an object. Right? So it's a mental image that arises. We have to think in terms of experiential thinking in order to understand this. Because if we think in terms of existential thinking, then of course we're talking about matter and so on, existence. But here, Bhante pointed out that this is a mental image. Every object we come across, whether we see, hear, smell, taste or touch it, it is an experience. So on page 108, right, further on, Bhante explained that the mind begins to give meaning. Giving meaning to what is perceived by the senses. And the meaning that is given produces a concept, right? And this process is called conception. The giving meaning or conception is cognition, the process of the mano, cognitive process. So when we look at the diagram, basically, what happens is that with this mental image, the mano begins to interpret and create the concept. How does it create the concept? It looks at past experiences. So every image that arises in the mind is then referred to a categorized memory of past experiences, a fluid past, in order to look for a matching categorized item. Take, for example, if I show you this bottle, some of you will say it's a bottle of water. Some of you will say it's a bottle of mineral water. Or if I show you this item, some of you will know, oh, it is a mouse, a computer mouse. But how do you know it is a computer mouse? Many of you have not seen this particular mouse before. So why are you calling this a mouse? You call this a mouse because it looks like all the other mouse that you have ever seen before. Categorized. Your mind has categorized, created a category called computer mouse. So when you see this object that looks like it, you call it a computer mouse. because of this categorization. And this is really what happened in the mind. Memory is stored by category. We don't store memory specifically to the detail. We store memory in a categorized manner. So with that, it then produces recognition. What is recognition? Recognition is really a categorized identity. And this is what Bhante calls Dhamma. Dhamma is an experience. Dhamma is a concept. Right? So basically that is the real meaning of Dhamma. Dhamma is not truth, so to speak. But a lot of people use the word Dhamma to mean truth. So Dhamma is really experience. Now, taking that statement one level further, then why do we call it Buddha Dhamma? So what is Buddha teaching? Is Buddha teaching some kind of universal truth from heaven or something like that? Oh no. Buddha was teaching his own experience. He experienced life as a lay person, right? As a prince, and then he became awakened, and that whole process of awakening is his experience. So he was teaching his whole experience of how he became awakened. And that is the Buddha Dhamma. So the Buddha Dhamma is really what the Buddha was teaching to be his experience of awakening. Not truth, so to speak. Some religions say that, oh, our doctrines is the truth from God, from heaven, and so on. But that's not what Buddha claimed. Buddha never proclaimed that it came from anyone else. He discovered it, so he was actually teaching his experience. That is Dhamma. So when the mind begins to process perception, so perception is the percept. Percept is then transformed into a concept. What is the concept here? If you saw a dog out there, what is the concept? There's a mental image of the dog, and then the mind says, oh, I see a dog out there. Concept of the entity identified as a dog out there, And that, you give it a label, it's a dog. That's nama. Now many translators translate rupa as object, materiality, matter, and nama to be mind. But actually, Bhante explained, nama is really the process of identifying, right? The label that is given as an identity. So nama is really a form of identification. Nama is not about the mind itself. Of course, it is the work of the mind, but nama is not referring to the mind. Not mentality, so to speak. But a lot of people translate nama as mentality. Rupa is appearance, right? The mental image of an object. So there are certain features. So when you say rupa is describing the features of an object, then that is correct. But rupa is not the physical existence of the object. So this is a very important point. And this is then explained by Bhante throughout his books. That rupa is really the mental image. Nama is the label assigned that we call that object. Right? So Dhamma is the experience, and this experience is put together by the mind, the mano. So the five sense organs picked up stimulations from the environment, and they are put together. So from seeing, you have visual image. From the ears, you have the sound image, auditory image. From the nose, you have olfactory image. From the body, you have touch image. And from the tongue, you have taste. And these are then put together. These images in the mind, mental images, are perceptions. Right? Mental images, vijnana, they arise in the mind. What was perceived by the sense organs. And then it is the mano, right? The cognitive process, which then categorizes it and puts it together and forms a big picture. The forming of the big picture is conception. And Bhante says conception is the process of cognition. So mano is the cognition. And conception is really what was recognized and identified by categorization of what was perceived. That is conception. Identifying a categorized perception. Right? Based on the perception, it identifies. So this was explained also further in page 70. Right? Perception develops into cognition. And this process of perception developing into cognition is called phassa. And Bhante explained further what phassa is, so I won't go much deeper, but basically the common translation for phassa is contact. Now, contact is a very existential term. There is no contact. If you see a dog, my question to you is there any contact between you and the dog? When you see a dog, there is no contact. So what is happening? Light reflected from the dog entering your eyes, and then mental image arises, and then you have the perception of a dog. So what are you seeing? You are seeing a reflection of the dog, light reflected from the dog. So that reflection itself is rupa, right? So that is really what the whole process of phassa is. This perception is then developed into cognition, phassa. And that is not contact. So I don't know how the origin of contact came about, but contact is a very existential term. Okay? And then I draw your attention to this center part on that page there. Okay? This way a percept, which is vijnana, a perception, is transformed into a concept. That means now we begin to give meaning to it, give labels to it, and create meaning. And this is Dhamma, the concept. Right? And through this process of conception, an entity in the form of an image, right? Again, image, rupa, is created with an identity. So entity, identity, right? Categorized entity and categorized identity in the form of nama. So identity is nama. So nama is identification. Nama is not mentality. Rupa is not object or materiality. Right? Rupa is really the appearance and the mental image of the object. Nama is really the identity, the identification of the object. So it's very important for you to refresh yourself, referring to the book and on those pages when you get back and reread them. If you still have questions about those things, feel free to drop me a note, refer to the page, and then we can discuss. Then on page 45 of the Buddhist Maha Vihara edition, at the bottom there, Bhante warned us that these concepts are flawed, that they are not always the reality. So Bhante pointed out that very often what we see, hear, smell, taste and touch, the mind processes it and it could develop into illusions, right? Then these illusions can turn into delusions, and Bhante further explained about illusions and delusions, which I will explain later on. What's the difference between an illusion and a delusion? So these concepts can become, can be flawed, may not be accurate. I mean, some people see this and they say it's a mouse. Some people see this, if they have not used a mouse ever before, then they're wondering what it is. So they don't know what it is. Some people see this and then they say this is a bottle of water. Some people say, no, it's mineral water. So different people create different concepts. So in other words, reality, what we think of as reality, is a subjective experience. Each and every one of us has our own way of interpreting what we see, hear, smell, taste and touch. Two people looking at exactly the same thing will have different interpretations in their mind, what it is that they are looking at. So let's take a look at this whole process of looking and how it actually can become distorted and turned into illusions and delusions. Right? So this is really today's topic. And Bhante calls this the dichotomy of experience. Unfortunately, this diagram I added on to the Mahindarama edition, but in the Buddhist Maha Vihara edition, there was no diagram there. So in the Mahindarama edition, it is found on page 126, that there is a diagram there, but in the Buddhist Maha Vihara edition, there is none. For those who seriously want to pursue in depth about what's inside this level 3 book, I do suggest you get hold of both. First, there are some diagrams found in this edition which I have added on, plus one chapter. In fact, 2 chapters, one Bhante added and one I added, 2 chapters that are not found in the older edition. Unfortunately, there are also some mistakes here made by the people who edited it. Therefore, you have to refer back to this one in some cases. So, the dichotomy of experience simply means that we break an experience down. The word dichotomy is a very, one of the things I like about Bhante, he's very good at picking the perfect word, and he calls this the dichotomy of experience. Dichotomy means to break something into 2 distinct parts, breaking it into 2 separate parts, 2 distinct parts. That means they are not the same or overlapping, they are 2 separate, distinct parts. So we break experience down. How do we do that? Experience depends on the presence of necessary conditions. And light is a necessary condition. Without light, you cannot see anything. If everything is pitch dark, you cannot see anything at all. So light is reflected from an object, from a dog, for instance. And that reflected light is a stimulus that enters the eye, the sense organ. Stimulate the sense organ, and we talked about that in depth at the last session, how the eye reacted to light stimulations. And then this process of perception arises when we pay attention, and it arises and produces a mental image. And that is the experience. That experience is as is. It is not broken as it is. But unfortunately, the mind likes to break it. How does the mind break it? The first thing the mind does when we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch is that thought arises. I see a dog out there. Or if you see your friend, oh, I see you. I see Sister Crystal. I see Brother Vince. I see Brother Wong. I see. What is the first word that comes up? I. So we are creating the notion that there is an I that is doing the seeing. And then we begin to project that, oh, this is the thing I see out there. Projecting the perception of the dog as an object out there. But where is the dog? Yes, there is a dog out there. But what are we seeing? We are not seeing the dog. We are seeing light reflected from the dog. And the mental image is formed. But then the mind then projects, oh, I see the dog out there. So that process, I see the dog out there, what has it done? It has dichotomized that experience. There is the I, there is the dog, there is out there. So it's breaking that whole experience into 2 parts. What are the 2 parts? The subjective part and the objective part. The subjective part is called the atta, which is the self. The subjective part, I see the dog, you see? And then the objective part is the dog is out there. There's a world out there that I am experiencing. That is dichotomizing that experience. In the process of seeing, there is only the seeing. But here we break that seeing into the subject, which is this self that is experiencing the seeing, and the object, which is the object that has been seen. We break it into 2 parts, dichotomizing that experience. So this is really what happens. And we're going to talk more about this 2 sessions from now, not the next one. 2 sessions from now, we're going to deal with the concept of self from a scientific perspective. Like I said, I came across some brand new material which talks about perception, conception, and the self. And these are neuroscientists discussing. They are not necessarily Buddhists, but they are discussing about the perception, conception, and the creation of the notion there is a self. And all of them unanimously basically agreed there is no such thing as a self. So they're talking from a scientific perspective how this self arises. So basically, as far as this notion of breaking that experience down, we'll stop here. I won't go much further than that on this breaking of the experience. We'll go back to conception, how concepts are formed in the mind. So from perception to concept. And I pointed out that concept is basically referring to categorized memory of past experience. So if I were to show you some pictures, right, and many of you would not have seen these pictures before. What is this? Can you tell me what this is? Anyone? A smiley face, yeah? Smiley face. And what is this? A ladder. And what is this? A hat, yeah. And how about this one? Some say balloon, some say mouse. That's fine. How about this one? Railway track. And this is very good. So far, I have shown you 5 images, and you're able to quickly mention what they are. Why? Because your mind has categorized. This is what a railway track looks like. If I draw another diagram similar to this and go the other way instead of slanting from right to left, now I slant from left to right, it's a different diagram. With the same strokes, you will still call it a railway track, right? But now I'm going to show you one picture and you tell me at the same speed you did before, what is this object? Nobody could tell me. Why? Because it doesn't look anything like any kind of category that you have ever seen before. That is why. You see? Because it does not look like. But hold it there. It is. It came from the hat. I just reshuffled individual bits of the hat. Now, you thought this was a balloon, but it was actually the smiley. I just shifted a couple of things. And you thought this was a railway track, but actually it was the ladder. I just slanted it. I slanted it, and then you call a ladder a railway track. Why? Because the slanting makes it look like a railway track. So that is how the mind creates concepts, by categorization. Because of something similar we have seen before, we group them into categories and then we give them a meaning. And of course, this came from the hat. But you couldn't figure it out because it does not look anything like any object you have seen before. Okay, so let's see what the scientists say about how this process of categorization takes place. Bhante calls this papancha, recognition.
Take a look at this object. One glance and you know what it is. But how do you know what it is and where it's positioned in space? Well, let's break it down. The light reflected by this object is converted by your eyes into an electrical signal and is sent down a neurological pathway called the optic nerve to the back of your brain. Starting in this region, called the visual cortex, the image is cross-referenced with memory of past experiences stored throughout your brain as you try to identify the object. Once it's figured out what it is, your brain has to decide how the object is positioned in space.
So that's how the mind works. It has stored memory of all objects, and every object we perceive, we begin to interpret by trying to find something matching similar. Not exact match, but similar. Now, in the field of neuro-linguistic programming, they call this transderivational search. Trans means across. Derivational means trying to match. Search. So, going across your entire memory, trying to match something based on the categorization. Amazing, when we see something, we can recognize it in less than a second. In fact, some scientists say it is down to 100 milliseconds. The moment we see something, we can recognize it. It can be as fast as 100 milliseconds, depending on what it is. Sometimes it takes a few seconds, right? So the mind works very fast, amazing. It scans through the entire memory of sorts and try to find something matching, and then we recognize what it is. Amazingly how fast the mind works. Now, let's look into how the mind is flawed. So when the mind is flawed, that means when it is making mistakes, it can then create illusions. Illusions are perceptual fallacy. Focus at any intersection and you will see a white dot. The white dot is there. It's very clear. Then see if you notice something else. What do you notice? Black dots. Wow, black dots. Take a look. Are black dots there? No black dots. This is again another way shadows, right? Shadows work, and they program into our mind, our brain actually over generations of generations, right? It's in the genes actually. Your children will see the same thing, right? This one, you focus in the center for about 10 seconds, focus in the center, and then begin to move your eyeball around a bit. What do you notice? You notice something about the image? It's what? Sorry, brother? Sparkling? Moving? Vibrating? Yeah. Focus in the center for 10 seconds and then look around. You will see as though there is motion, but I can assure you this image is a perfectly static image. Nothing is moving. Now, this is my favorite. I'm going to show you a very short video clip. You listen to the person explaining to you what you should do, okay?
Let's start with this illusion. Stare at the X in the middle of the image. Do you see the green dot moving around in a circle? Now try to follow that green dot with your eyes. Nothing there, right? This illusion helps demonstrate how quickly your brain finds motion in your surroundings.
All this proves one important thing. Seeing the light is real, but the mind begins to construct the mental image, the perception, and that can be flawed. Don't trust your senses. Simply put, don't trust your senses. And this is my all-time favorite, right? It looks like the back of a laptop, similar to mine, yeah? You have the cover at the top and you have the base at the bottom, so it's standing vertical, more or less. So, which one is darker, the upper portion or the lower portion darker? Upper portion is darker. You sure? You're very sure that the upper portion is darker? You sure? Sure? Now, if you don't believe me that you are wrong, hold out your finger horizontally, close one eye, and block out the middle. After blocking out the middle, okay, Sister Billing, can you pass him your name card? You need your eyes checked. No, it's not. If you really block out the middle, the center. Now it's the same. All this proves one important point. Don't trust your senses. Why? Because billions and billions of sanya, like sensitive sanya, entering the brain, being put together, construction, sankhara, to produce the big picture, vijnana. And that production is flawed because they interfere. All these signals interfere with one another. And the interference will cause a lot of illusions. They may even cause delusions. I'll explain the difference later. At the end of the day, seeing light is real. Sanya is real. Beyond sanya, everything can be an illusion. Right? That's why we live in the dream of existence, that we look at things as though they are static, as though this building is fixed. But actually this building is not fixed, it's constantly vibrating. It's just that we don't see the vibration, but it's constantly vibrating. Energy vibrating, right? Like a heartbeat going on. So that is really what's going on. So going back to this, which we showed at the last session, where Bhante pointed out very clearly from this is from the Buddha's teaching, from one of the sutras, that there is no truth in this world. We call truth, but there is no truth. So if truth is one, that means if there is truth, that means there is only one truth. There can't be two different truths, right? There can only be one truth. If truth is one and there is no second truth, then there will be no argument. Everybody will say this is the truth. What is there to argue about? But that is not the case, right? A variety of truths they themselves form. Gurus therefore never speak of one truth. The word guru here is referring to samana, teachers. Right? Actually, it's teachers, people who teach people doctrines. Each one has his own version of explanation of what is the reality of life. Right? So one religion will explain to you the world is created by God. Another religion will explain to you that there are 3 different gods. Another religion will explain to you there are 35,000 gods. And then, then who is right? There is no one truth. Every teacher has his version of what he calls the truth. So in other words, there's no such thing as truth. In the next paragraph, never was there a variety of truth other than sensations in the world, sanya. Creating views using speculative logic, they speak of a duality of falsehood and truth. That means the mind begins to create concepts, views, concepts, ideas, stories, charita, right? And it is the mind producing stories behind everything we see, hear, smell, taste and touch. But when we seeing the light, that is real. That's why they say sensation is real. Sanya, right? From the word sanya. Seeing is very easy, right? Easy to explain, and it's, in fact, the sight is the most complex sense. That's why we use sight to explain. And also, sight is easy to explain. People can see how things are different from one person looking at it to another person. Okay, so sensations, and this is looking at the Panchakanda, sanya. The sanya here. This is the only thing that is real. Beyond sanya, you have sankhara, construction. And construction produces big picture, perception. And that big picture gives rise to a mental image in the mind. So this is really, and when it reaches this stage, they could be flawed. Flawed means it could be a fallacy. So let's talk about fallacy. And Bhante pointed out there are 2 kinds of fallacy. Bhante is, his command of English is incredible. He pointed out, illusion is a perceptual fallacy. Delusion is a conceptual fallacy. What's the difference? Illusion is caused by cognition of sensory stimulus. That means your sense organ being stimulated by activities in the environment. And it is affecting our perception of sensory stimulus. That means the forming of mental image. And if that mental image does not represent what is really out there, it is an illusion, right? That's why magicians are very good at that. You see them carve up a body. You see them enter a cage, cover it with a curtain, lift the curtain, and the person is gone. Amazing how they can do this illusion. There is no magic in this world. They are not doing real magic. In fact, magicians are the most honest professionals. They will tell you they don't have supernatural powers. Whatever they're doing is an illusion. They're not trying to lie to you. They are doing illusions and show you their illusions. Illusion is when your sense organ tells you something which is different from what is really out there. Illusion. Delusion is a conceptual fallacy. Delusion is caused by affective process, your emotional reaction, emotionally associating something that you've seen, heard, smell, taste, and touch, and in interpretation based on this emotional association of your perception, and then drawing on memory, imagination, expectation, and that is delusion. It leads to mental proliferation. That means the mind begins to wander off, thinking all kinds of things, affecting your concept of reality, right? What you believe to be true, right? Whereas in the case of illusion, you can see the magician doing that, it can't be true. And yet, that's what you see, you know it's not true. You don't believe it is true. You don't believe he can cut up the body and then that person is still alive. Of course, we don't believe that. So it is not a delusion, it's an illusion. But once you believe that he really cut up the body and that person come back alive, then that is a delusion, right? And Bhante pointed out in page 48, and the transformation of thinking is the paradigm shift. Because if you don't, we will continuously fall into illusions and delusions. We cannot look at something and begin to look at the object itself. You see, illusion is when we focus our attention on the object. And focusing attention on the object can lead to misinterpreting what we see as the object. Bhante teaches us to look at the process of perception, how we see. And how we see is not something you can learn to practice easily. Through a process of meditation, then you can begin to recognize how you are seeing. And once you begin to realize how you're seeing, you're actually experiencing vipassana. That's really what it is. You're beginning to experience vipassana. V means distinct. Passana means seeing. So you begin to see the reality of things. How things come to be. Understanding how things arise. How things come to be. Not looking at, how things are, Not to see how things are. To think of how things are, you're looking at the object. To think how things come to be, you're looking at the process of perception, the process that gives you the perception there is this object. Why is that? So I'm going to show you the scientific explanation why the mind is doing all these funny things. It's called mental filters. And this is an unconscious mental conditioning because of the way our body has evolved. If you look at this, I don't think there is any Malaysian who would say she's not pretty, right? Everyone would say she is pretty. But there are some people in the world, somewhere else, who would say she's ugly. Because why? They say, this one is pretty. You don't have a neck that long, you're ugly. But when you look at this, would you say this is a pretty girl? But in her culture, she could be the prettiest girl in the village. But in our culture, some of us shriek, we can't even fathom having a relative with that kind of neck. And what about this? Right? They extend their lips to that size, but in their culture, she's very beautiful. And how about this one? In her culture, she's beautiful with an earlobe that size. So basically, reality is a subjective experience. Each one of us has our own interpretation of what is real, what is good, what is not good. Each one of us. So reality is a subjective experience. You can believe what you want to believe. We are self-deceiving organisms. And this picture here tells it all. A lot of people go through this experience, right? So why is that? Because of the mental filter. Our mind has filters. What is going on? Our 5 sense organs continuously pick up sensory stimulations and feed them to the brain. The brain can cope. Now, differentiate the brain. The brain is an organ. It is actually an engine. It's an electrochemical engine. It is made of parts which produce electricity, made of parts that produce chemicals. So it's a biological engine. And it can cope with all these signals going to the brain, because if you can't cope, your head will be bursting, But your head is not bursting because of something else. But the brain itself can cope. It is the mind that cannot cope. So the brain is receiving all this input. But our conscious mind, our cognitive process, our conscious mind is not capable of processing every single stimulus that the brain receives from the sense organ. So what does the mind try to do? The mind tries to simplify. What can the mind do? The mind can only concentrate, on one thing at a time. But it can, of course, alternate between 3 or 4 tasks, as though simultaneously, but there is no such thing as multitasking. Multitasking is a fallacy. We cannot multitask. We are trying to do 3 or 4 things at the same time, but at any one moment in time, we are only focused on one thing. So if we're trying to do 4 things, A, B, C, D, for instance, and A is something we do a lot, and B lesser, C lesser, and D is the least. Take, for example, a housewife cooking. While she's cooking, she's busy cooking constantly. So cooking is A. And then at the same time, she's watching Astro while I toy or whatever Astro going on, So that's B. She likes to watch the soap opera. And at the same time, she's trying to stir the soup from time to time. That is C. And then at the same time, she's also trying to make a cup of tea for herself. And that would be D. So what would she be doing? She'd be spending a lot of time doing A. Quite a bit of time on B, a little bit on C, and very little on D. So what's going on in the mind? The mind is focusing only on one thing at a time. So how is it focusing? It is focusing on A, B, C, A, B, C, C, A, B, D, A, D, A, B. Jumping between A, B, C, D. But many times coming back to A. So it gives the impression as though she's doing 4 different things simultaneously. But it's not. The mind is jumping back and forth, zigzagging between these 4 tasks. This is why we can make mistakes. And some of us are hero with driving. We do that all the time. And then we got the cell phone. We even put it on a little bracket right in front of the windscreen, as though we can see the traffic and see the phone at the same time. And then the WhatsApp message come up. And then we try to look. You can't look at the traffic and look at your WhatsApp at the same time. So don't try to do that. Because you're zigzagging, your eye is zigzagging between the traffic and the WhatsApp message. So that is really what's going on. The mind can only focus on one thing at a time. So our conscious mind copes with this by applying filters, simplifying, trying to rationalize what we are experiencing. And it does 3 things to everything we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. Generalization, categorization. That's why the mind can only remember things in a categorized manner. So the first thing it tries to do, generalize. Try to group things together so it's easier for the mind to process, simplify for the mind. The second thing it tries to do is delete information it doesn't find useful or it may not wish to focus on. Ignoring, leaving out details of certain portions of the experience that it is not focusing on. And the third thing is worse, distortion. That means changing the meaning, inaccurately representing it, distorting it. The mind is constantly doing these 3 things at the same time. So we cannot tell what it is, which one it is doing, in which experience, what is it doing. But sometimes it is doing all 3 on any one experience. It may be all 3, it may be just one. So deletion, generalization, and distortion. Let's take a look at deletion. What goes on? Deletion is that when the eyes actually see something, but we don't process it. We delete that information. I will ask the 3 people sitting at the end here, at the back row here, one simple question. How many people in the room? Oh, you can't answer that. Why? You should be able to answer. The 3 of you that's sitting at the back. Why? Because your eyeball has scanned every single person in the room. Why can't you tell me how many people in the room? Sister Shanti, you can't tell me how many people in the room right away, right? You have to count, right? But your eyeball, don't you think that your eyeball has seen every single head in here? But why doesn't it register how many? Deletion. Your mind deleted that information. Every time you see a face, your mind deleted it. You see a face, your mind deleted it. You never bother to pay attention how many in the room. But your brain has registered how many people in the room. It's just that your mind did not pay attention to it, deleted that information. This is the activity of the mind, not the brain. But unfortunately, I must point out, all the scientists who produce these videos, they always call the mind and the brain as one. They don't differentiate. But it is not. The mind is an activity of the brain. The mind is not the brain. The brain is not the mind. The brain can cope. The brain has seen every single head in this room. Right? The brain has processed every single head in this room, but the mind doesn't want to count deleted that information. So this is why you can't tell how many people in the room. Right? No, it doesn't decide. It just deletes randomly and try to focus on what it wants to focus. When you want to pay attention on something, the mind will gear its attention towards that thing. Everything else around it, it ignores. See, you came in here to want to listen to what is being spoken here, so you don't notice. What if a youngster came in not interested in what we are talking, but very interested to see who is in the room? He would probably know how many in the room, because he'll be looking at every person. This person doing that person doing this. Oh, there are 10 males and 3 females or something like that. He would know. Why? Because his mind is focused on who is in the room, what is every person doing. But the rest of us, or the rest of you presumably, are focused on what is going on in this proceeding. Right? So let's take a look at what is deletion.
University of Illinois professor Dan Simons thinks that he has found a way to make a gorilla invisible. As this reconstruction shows, Simons can make an adult primate disappear right in front of your eyes. Or in this case, a student in a gorilla suit being filmed while taking a stroll up and down a busy street. A gorilla walking around the neighborhood is not an everyday sight, and it was hard for people not to notice a large hairy ape walking down the sidewalk. One guy took some photos. A few drivers honked their horns, and the cops pulled up to make some discreet inquiries. This gorilla was definitely not invisible. Next, a group of volunteers were invited to a screening of the gorilla film. The audience was told nothing about the movie, just instructed to count how many cars whizzed past on the screen. Then it was time for the world premiere of Gorillas in Our Midst. When the lights came back up, the audience members were asked how many cars they counted. They were also asked if they'd noticed anything unusual about the movie they had been watching.
Unusual? No, not really, no. No, I didn't notice anything.
No, I didn't.
Absolutely no one in the room noticed a gorilla walking down the street, even though it was clearly an attention-grabbing object in plain sight. It's like it disappeared right before their eyes.
We should have spotted it, but the aim was to spot the cars, not the things around it, so it was a bit more tricky.
You just don't see how you couldn't have seen it in the first time. It's a bit crazy.
How could so many people not see the gorilla? Professor Simons believes that when people are asked to concentrate on a complex task, they can suffer from a phenomenon known as inattentional blindness.
Their attention is focused elsewhere, and as a result, they just don't see things that are in their environment.
Simons theorized that people miss seeing what was right in front of them, such as a gorilla, because their brain was filtering out information to make their task more manageable. In this case, the volunteers did not register the gorilla because they were so focused on counting cars.
So not one single person saw the gorilla. And I mean, gorillas walking down the street is not something that happens normally. So that is deletion. Let's take a look at generalization. That means you don't pay attention to any detail at all, and then you generalize. And you look at two different people and you can even think it's the same person, even if they're not twins and they're not even wearing the same kind of clothing.
Dan Simons is setting up at a counter where a clerk will converse with volunteers to see how aware they are of their surroundings. Play along with the participants in this one.
What's up, buddy? All right, real good. I got a form. Let me just grab you a pen. All right, here we go.
All right, now basically all this is a release form.
Okay, stop. Have you noticed anything weird so far? If you didn't, let's run through this one again for you.
I got a form. Let me just grab you a pen.
All right, here we go.
If you caught this one, you may be surprised to find out you're in the minority. Now, let's run this one on a few more people to see just how many of them catch the switch.
Hey, what's up, buddy? How you doing? I just need you to fill out this release form, please. Let me grab you a pen.
Okay, here we go. Go ahead and just sign and date it. So where are you from?
New Jersey.
How you doing today?
Great, how are you?
Real good, real good. I just need you to fill out this release form. Let me grab you a pen, okay?
Okay, here we go.
Let me just grab you a pen for this.
Okay. Making me sign a waiver for this, huh?
All right, here we go. Yeah, absolutely.
None of the next 3 people catch the switch.
Hello.
You may still be doubting that you would fall for this one if you were there in person.
What's your name?
Eva. EVA.
How could you possibly miss a person swapping out mid-conversation in plain view?
Can you describe the person who was here behind the counter?
He had dark hair. I think he had a black shirt on, but I'm not sure.
Can you stand up?
Oh my god, it was him!
And you don't recognize him, though.
No, I've never seen you before.
Okay, he was actually here behind the counter when you first came up to the counter. He's the one who said, I'm gonna duck down and get you a pen.
Oh my god, are you serious? Oh, that's totally embarrassing.
It turns out you don't notice changes like this because you don't expect them to occur.
So that is generalization. Let's take a look at distortion. Who amongst you, which young guy is still single? Vince, single? Okay, good. You live in this locality and you heard someone say there's a very pretty girl down the street. And then you saw her in the distance. Oh, there she is. So you got closer. And as you walk closer, oh, nice. What kind of hair does she have? Long hair. What kind of skirts or pants is she wearing? Shorts, huh? Oh, nice, huh? Long black hair, huh? So she has long black hair and wearing hot pants. Yeah? So this is distortion. How does that happen? This is actually what Bhante called conceptual fallacy. Sorry to say, but this is delusion. This is because you fall into this condition called believing is seeing. When I explained to you about this girl living down the street, it was a story I created, and then your mind begins to believe in that story. So when your mind begins to believe in a particular story, every evidence you see that seems to support that story, it will be amplified. Every evidence that goes against that story, you ignore it. This is a very natural part of the brain. The same with any religion. Some people who believe that God created the world, they will look at every little thing that says that there is a God up there and then say, oh yeah, that proves that God up there. But when you start to show them evidence of evolution and things like that, they will say, oh no, that's not real. It can't be true. And there are still people today who believe God created the world and insisted that according to their holy books, the world is only 10,000 years old. I mean, there are still people who believe that. And, so that is what we call believing is seeing. When your mind begins to believe in something, it locks on to that belief, and then any evidence against it, you just ignore it. Any evidence in support of it, you blow it up, the thing about the long hair and all that. So that is delusion.
So now you change the word seeing is believing to hold like that.
We don't live in the seeing is believing mode. We all live in the believing is seeing mode. The mind locks onto a belief and then it will stick to that. Yes. That's how it works. Actually, this is part of what I call the 17 cognitive distortions. I give a talk on that called the Cultivating Emotional Composure, where I explain these 17 thinking traps. This is one of them. Believing is seeing. There are 17 of them that leads to delusions. Right? So this is just one of them. So that is delusion, conceptual fallacy, from cognitive distortion. Psychologists call this cognitive distortion. The mind distorts the reality, distorts the evidence. Okay, So this is basically all I have for today's sharing. Thank you very much for paying attention. This is about how the mind creates concepts, and concepts can lead to illusions and delusions.